Today's video sponsor is GGG Mall, where using my SKG discount code leads to a 25% off across several products, making a Windows 10 serial key only $16. After the payment, you'll receive the key in your account and all you need to do is to introduce it in your Windows settings and bam! You have an activated system.
Hello guys, I Shoot Gameplays, I'm Fabio Pisco and welcome to my channel. Well, before anything, just Happy New Year, use your right foot to go into the new year, do your, well, that shit that people say when it's the new year and then they never fulfill until the first day of the next year. Yeah. And well, before the video starts, just let me tell you that do not come with those "well man, this video makes no sense because, well, you know, RTX 3070 and RX 6800 are not even on the same tier or of the RX 7900 XTX, and this comparison makes no sense." All comparisons make sense. They may not make sense to you, but they may make sense to anyone, and this video is particularly aimed at people that have the RTX 3070 or the RX 6800, or maybe more or less on par with the performance of those cards, and want to know if it is worth upgrading to the RX 7900 XTX or not. Okay, so this video is aimed at people looking for an upgrade that have more or less the same performance as both these two cards. As both these cards, okay? And well, I do believe there's not really much more to say, at least in the intro. There will be more in the conclusion. So, is it worth upgrading to the RX 7900 XTX from the RTX 3070 or the RX 6800 or not? Let's watch.
Today's first game is Plague Tale Requiem. This game is highly GPU intensive, and it kind of shows here, with the RTX 3070 being slightly faster than the RX 6800, while the RX 7900 XTX is much faster, in this case around 80%, which makes it a considerable upgrade from both the other two cards. At 1440p things don't change that much, but the RX 6800 now matches the RTX 3070 with around 70 average FPS, while the RX 7900 XTX is pushing comfortably over 133, which is almost twice as fast as the other cards. At 4K, the RX 6800 manages to outperform the RTX 3070 once again, but both stay below the 40 average FPS mark, which is perfectly normal considering how heavy this game is, and with the RX 7900 XTX being able to deliver 75 FPS, which is a pretty respectable number for this game at 4K. Now we have Assassin's Creed Valhalla using very high settings, and well, although the difference in between both AMD cards is still pretty big, I must say that I was expecting a bit more, but we're still talking about 215 average FPS, which is a crazy amount, and most likely CPU bottlenecked to a certain extent. And at 1440p we can confirm that indeed, with the RX 7900 XTX now being 61% faster than the RX 6800 instead of the previous 41%. And of course the RX 6800 is also 15 average FPS faster than the RTX 3070, which in here is around 15%. Moving to 4K raises once again the difference in between both AMD cards, now up to 73% from the previous 61% at 1440p, which makes it an even more respectable upgrade from both the RX 6800 or RTX 3070. Now we have Cyberpunk 2077 using the high settings preset. As can be seen, the previous generation cards can still handle their own very well at 1080p, with the RX 6800 pushing over 134 average FPS and the RTX 3070 pushing 113. The RX 7900 XTX on the other hand is once again pushing around 210 average FPS, which is only 56% faster than the RX 6800, but once again, it's 1080p and CPU bottleneck is actually a thing. And that's why things change at 1440p, and the RX 7900 XTX is now 74% faster than the RX 6800, delivering 158 average FPS, while the RTX 3070 actually struggles to reach 76, which is considerably slower than the RX 6800. And it is only at 4K that we see almost double the performance of the RX 6800. In this case, a 92% advantage. Both the RX 6800 and the RTX 3070 are around the 40 average FPS mark, with the RX 7900 XTX pushing over 80. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 is one of those games that can pull the best out of the new AMD cards due to its engine, and that's why even at 1080p we see the RX 7900 XTX delivering over double the performance of the RX 6800, which is where it should sit in almost all games. Also, Smart Access Memory seems to make no difference for the RX 6800 in this title, but for the RX 7900 XT it gains it around 50 average FPS. Which is interesting to note. As we go into 1440p, the differences just get bigger, with the RTX 3070 failing hard to reach the RX 6800 values, and the RX 7900 XTX simply mopping the floor with both, being 145% faster than the RTX 3070. And well, at 4K things just get better for the RX 7900 XTX, still being able to deliver 132 average FPS at extreme settings. Guardians of the Galaxy is a title where the Nvidia GPUs tend to strive, more or less the same way the AMD GPUs do in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. At 1080p we get a massive CPU bottleneck on the RX 7900 XTX, and that's why the results fluctuate a bit more and are actually just a bit higher than the RTX 3070 ones. And that's why we get the same exact 195 average FPS that we have at 1080p at 1440p. And we're still being CPU bottlenecked. In this title, the RTX 3070 just fools around with the RX 6800, delivering better averages and much better 1% lows, meaning that the gameplay will be much smoother on the RTX 3070 in this game. At 4K we finally get relieved of the CPU bottleneck on the RX 7900 XTX, now being 67% faster than the RX 6800, which is on average faster than the RTX 3070 at 4K, but once again delivers lower 1% lows. Forza Horizon 5 is one of the most messed up games I've seen so far on this GPU. Considering even only 30% over the RX 6950 XT, this card should be pushing around 250 average FPS, but due to the lack of driver optimizations, it actually runs slower than the RTX 3070 if we don't activate Smart Access Memory, which is just ridiculous. At 1440p, the outstandingly low results continue on the RX 7900 XTX that barely beats the RX 6800. But well, the RX 6000 series cards also saw a very good performance uplift over time on Forza Horizon 5, so I do believe that the performance in this game will be exponentially higher over time. At 4K, the results are just disappointing once again, delivering the same amount of FPS as the 6950 XT, which was AMD's previous flagship. This just shows us how much improvements on the drivers we need in order to make the performance right on this title. A very sad moment for Forza players. Going to Rainbow Six Extraction, we get back to the normal results per se, with all cards delivering over 200 average FPS at 1080p, and the RX 7900 XTX running into a slight CPU bottleneck at 420, being 67% faster than the RX 6800 and 102% faster than the RTX 3070, so over double the performance. At 1440p, the RX 7900 XTX is still delivering double the performance of the RTX 3070, which, apart from the 1% lows, is now closer to the RX 6800, and at 4K, all cards are delivering very good results, considering of course their performance and price tiers, with the RX 7900 XTX being a good upgrade for people playing this game.
Cessna Alpha Sierra X-Ray Golf Sierra is type Cessna 152 4 miles south.
Now we have Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 using the high-end settings preset. In this title at 1080p, the RX 6800 is a bit faster than the RTX 3070 in terms of averages, but much faster in terms of 1% lows, meaning that playing this game on an AMD card would deliver a much smoother experience. And of course, the RX 7900 XTX was severely CPU bottlenecked, and that's why we have the same averages at 1440p when using it, now being over 80% faster than the other two cards, as it should. At 4K, the difference just gets bigger, with the RX 7900 XTX now delivering over double the performance of the other two cards, making it a very good upgrade for 4K Flight Simulator players, that will now be able to enjoy over 100 frames per second without needing to use any kind of upscaling technology. Red Dead Redemption 2 is the second game where I felt that optimization was actually needed, because although it performs quite better than the RX 6800, it just isn't enough, being only 54% faster with barely higher minimums. At 1440p the advantage goes up to 61%, which is better, but we actually have lower minimums than with the RX 6800, which makes absolutely no sense for anyone. And it is only at 4K that the performance difference shoots up to 70%, with the minimums now being considerably higher. Still, this is one of those games that AMD needs to improve the drivers for, as the stock performance isn't bad per se, but it is way worse than it should ever be. At least that's what I think. With God of War using ultra settings, we have some interesting results. Although the RX 7900 XTX is already 80% faster than the RX 6800 and twice as fast as the RTX 3070 at 1080p, using Smart Access Memory actually decreases the performance in the 1% lows by 30 FPS, which is just insane. It seems that resizable bar does not work with God of War at all, and I'm fine with it getting no performance boost, but getting a performance decrease is another thing. and we could just argue that it is just a momentary performance drop. But that wasn't the case, as at 1440p we still have a massive 1% lows drop when using smart access memory, making the overclocked 1% lows actually lower than the stock ones. The same happens at 1440p ultra-wide, which once again indicates issues that are related to the drivers and this game in particular. I mean, this card is still 92% faster than the RX 6800 at 1440p ultra-wide, which is a great result, but those 1% lows drops just make no sense at all. To finalize this part, we have the 10 games average, where 1440p ultra-wide results from God of War are included in the 4K averages. I know. Anyway, as can be seen, at 1080p the RX 6900 XT is around 71% faster than the RTX 3070, this because of CPU bottlenecks in some games of course, while at 4K it offers basically double the performance of the RTX 3070, which once again is quite nice for people looking to upgrade from each one of these cards. Take in consideration that with time the performance of the RX 7900 XTX will also increase exponentially, this since there are some games where the GPU is being poorly optimized due to drivers.
But lost hope. We're not from here either. Stellantis locked us up here a year ago.
Going into the ray tracing benchmarks, the first game we have is Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition, which is a full ray tracing game, meaning that you won't be able to run it unless your GPU supports hardware ray tracing. In here we also have some interesting results, mostly with the RX 6800 versus the RTX 3070, where the RTX 3070 is much faster, but at the same time presents way lower 1% lows, meaning that some frame drops will most likely happen here and there. At 1080p the RX 7900 XTX is 89% faster than the RX 6800, but just 41% faster than the RTX 3070. At 1440p the advantage goes to 98% over the RX 6800, but still only 41% faster than the RTX 3070. And at 4K the difference gets even smaller, which is kind of a bummer to see actually. With Cyberpunk 2077, which is ridiculously heavy for what it brings to the table with ray tracing, well, natively the RX 7900 XTX was easily pushing 210 average FPS at 1080p while being CPU bottlenecked. But as soon as we activate ray tracing, it goes down to 70, which is 76% faster than the RX 6800, but only 36% faster than the RTX 3070. At 1440p things change a bit though, with the RX 7900 XTX now being 91% faster than the RX 6800 and 55% faster than the RTX 3070. That same RTX 3070 does fare very well though, because as soon as we use FSR or DLSS, it still can achieve around 60 average FPS with ray tracing and 1440p resolution, with the RX 7900 XTX delivering only a bit more FPS at around 75. Now with Spider-Man Remastered also using ray tracing, I was recently told that this game uses ray tracing more on the CPU side, hence the PCI Express bandwidth being necessary for higher performance and most CPUs getting destroyed by it. As you can see at 1080p we run into a massive CPU bottleneck, with the RX 7900 XTX barely managing to be faster than the RTX 3070. At 1440p we're still CPU bottlenecked, just a little bit less. Strangely, the RX 6800 now performs better than the RTX 3070 with ray tracing enabled, and by 8 average FPS. At 4K the bottleneck is still there of course for the RX 7900 XTX, but it is minimal, with the RX 6800 still delivering more FPS than the RTX 3070 and the RX 7900 XTX delivering 77 average FPS, which is still a playable experience. Overall, this game is very heavy on the CPU side, and depending on the CPU you have, a bottleneck can happen, even at 4K.
Brother!
Getting closer to the end, we have the upscaling benchmarks, firstly with God of War. One thing that I noticed when testing the RX 7900 XTX was that the upscaling performance boost was almost non-existent in some games. Well, as can be seen here, where we didn't even get 10% performance boost. And we could argue once again that we saw almost no performance uplift due to a CPU bottleneck. And that would be true, if of course we didn't have lower FPS values at 1440p ultra-wide while still getting only a marginal performance boost, something that isn't happening with the previous generation cards, which is quite odd. Spider-Man Remastered shows us the same exact story, with all cards having around the same performance at 1440p with FSR enabled, with XeSS actually delivering less performance than native on the RTX 3070. But well, now we are indeed CPU bottlenecked, so let's move to 4K. We did saw before that the CPU was indeed able to deliver around 140 average FPS, so we should have more FPS when using FSR with the RX 7900 XTX. Still, it doesn't happen. Again. While we get an awesome performance uplift with the older cards, we get absolutely nothing with the newer RX 7900 XTX, showing us once again how much AMD needs to improve driver-wise in some scenarios, being the upscalers one of them. Now that we saw everything, let's go to the conclusion.
And well guys, concluding, well, as you saw in terms of raw performance for 1080p resolution, well, it usually makes no sense upgrading to the RX 7900 XTX, even more that it still has some issues at 1080p, and in most scenarios you'll be CPU bottlenecked. Even with the best CPU on earth, you will be CPU bottlenecked at 1080p, okay, using an RTX 4080, RTX 4090, and even the RX 7900 XTX that is better in CPU limited scenarios than the RTX cards, okay. It's due to drivers and due to the hardware itself, and even though you'll be CPU bottlenecked. If you're going for 1440p, well, if you want 1440p high frame rates, it might be a good upgrade, but we're talking about, let's say, 80% performance increase over the RTX 3070 and around 70 to 75% increase over the RX 6800, depending on the titles, of course. And if we indeed go to 4K, and if you're going and running 4K without any kind of upscaling technology, or if you don't want to use those same upscaling technologies, or once again, if you want to use those same upscaling technologies to have even more frame rates, the RX 7900 XTX might be the one that you want to choose, because once again, it is double the performance of the RTX 3070 at 4K and around 75% faster than the RX 6800, in some cases even more than that, 80 or 85%. So it will even get better with time, that I can assure you that it will get way better with time, because there are some games where it doesn't still perform as it should, but that's obvious. We are still on the second drivers for this new architecture, the RDNA 3, and the RDNA 2 architecture, which is the RX 6000 series, has seen an amazing improvement in performance over time, okay? Especially in some games where it had lower performance, the performance has been growing driver after driver. Forza Horizon 5 is one of those titles where the performance had, let's say, 20 to 30% increase from the first drivers to the recent drivers in terms of performance in that game and in some cards, the 6800 being one of them. So yeah, it makes difference, and as soon as smart access memory gets to be properly used in most scenarios, the performance difference will be even higher. So lay an eye on that. So if you're buying one of these cards in order to keep it for several years, well, it is a good choice, because it will just get better and better, and so far if you get one inside the MSRP around 1000 euros, it might be an interesting upgrade. But if you don't really want to go into that 1000 bucks thing, you can actually go to the second-hand market, and you can get, for example, a 7900 XT or the 7950 XT, or let's say even an RTX 3080. And way cheaper than any of these cards, with a considerable performance boost. The 6950 XT in some scenarios is even faster than the 3090 Ti in some games, and overall is faster than the 3090, and you can get one in the used market, let's say for around 600 bucks, and sometimes even new. If you get a very good promotion from a decent store, sometimes you may be able to actually catch a 6950 XT for around $600, $650, or maybe $700, and that's a massive deal in terms of price performance, even more if it is on the $600 mark. So If you get a cheap 6950 XT, I advise you to go with the 6950 XT because drivers are already matured, the performance is very good overall, and the price performance and performance per watt is also very good. If you want to get the big dog right now in order to don't even bother in the next years and having, for example, AV1 encoding and decoding, AV1 codec for streaming as well, if you want all the kit, let's say, to not worry about for the next years to come, then the 7900 XTX may be the way to go. If, once again, you find one inside the MSRP. Otherwise, it is not worth it for me. And well guys, hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share it because it really helps a lot. It really helps a lot me and the channel, which is basically me. And I'm really happy to bring you a video in the first day of the year. Once again, never and never forget. Time is the most valuable money that you have, okay? Nothing can buy time. Nothing, literally. You can buy time by buying NVMEs, you can buy time by buying a faster card. But in its essence, time can't be bought. So use your time money wisely because you can't go back there. So, yeah. Once again, thanks a lot for watching and see you in the next video.